Part 7. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 61. At night, there were stars, and the summer night breeze blew with a cool breath over the entire dark city. This place seems to have fallen asleep completely. In the middle of the city, a few wisps of white smoke were twining with sparks rising in the sky, injecting a bit of life into the seemingly lifeless city. Several bonfires were set up in the open square, next to a dozen military green camping tents. Dozens of awakened people of different ages and costumes were sitting around a campfire, where they were discussing secret plans after convening a search team. Miu sensed that the members of these search teams were B-level at last, and there were more than a dozen of them who had reached A-level. Then, Miu looked at the white-haired man in a white suit with an indifferent expression standing in front of him, Ji Yufeng, the captain of the law enforcement team. The supernatural energy fluctuations in Ji Yufeng's body are more intense than those of others. If the supernatural energy in the bodies of these A-level awakeners is like a pool of warm water, then what is contained in Ji Yufeng's body is like a clear spring. He is clearly an S-level ability awakener. Miu narrowed her eyes slightly, and even the smile on her face faded a lot. For some reason, after seeing Ji Yufeng, the fire demon consciousness in his body became agitated, and a nameless anger suddenly rose up to the bottom of his heart. Ji Yufeng stood next to the tent and looked at a middle-aged man next to him. The middle-aged man understood instantly, stretched out his hands and raised them around. A purple light curtain visible to the naked eye suddenly rose from the periphery of the square, and gradually came together to form a purple light mask surrounding the square. Miu used her telekinesis tentacles to test and realized that this purple light curtain was actually made of some special spiritual energy. The middle-aged man who emits a purple light curtain explained to everyone. This light curtain is my special power. It can detect all unknown signals and life forms entering the barrier, and can also provide a certain degree of defense when necessary. As he said that, he scanned the crowd again. Of course, it can also detect the entry and exit of people inside, including the transmission of internal signals. This sentence is a bit playful to say. An inexplicable color flashed in Miu's eyes, and she already had some guesses about the next plan. But I heard Ji Yufeng say, there is only one purpose for calling you here this time. That is to eliminate a pagan stronghold in Lannan City. Heterogeneous church. Why are those crazy people here? Once Ji Yufeng's words came out, it caused an uproar in the scene. The faces of many awakened people in the search team showed expressions of fear, hatred, or disgust. But without exception, it is easy to see from their reactions that they are full of rejection and disgust towards this heterologous religion. Miu looked at Wei Linger with questioning eyes, but found that the eldest lady also showed an indignant look. Wei Linger quietly explained to Miu, the heterogeneous religion is a terrorist organization composed of a group of paranoid and crazy awakened people after the outbreak of the apocalypse. They firmly believe that this doomsday is just a test from God to the world. We awakened people are just incomplete evolutions, and those zombie heretics who are completely mutated and have zombie sanity are the real new world rulers truly chosen by the Creator. Is there such an organization? Miu rubbed her chin, with curiosity in her eyes. It's funny, isn't it? Wei Linger smiled bitterly and said, these alien cult members worship powerful heretics, and even regard them as monsters as their masters, helping the heretics fight against the human base. They also continue to spread their crazy ideas in the major safe zone bases, trying to assimilate those survivors who have been forced into desperation and worship the evil heretics with them. A bunch of bigoted lunatics worshipping heretics. Miu suddenly became interested in this alien church. I didn't expect that we would be dealing with this terrible organization this time. It's no wonder that Ji Yufeng personally took action. Wei Linger suddenly understood something. It seems that the fact that we were monitored by drones yesterday must have been the work of the alien cult. Fortunately, we ran fast. What those lunatics like to do most is to contribute powerful awakened people to the heretics for raw food. Mu became interested and was about to continue asking, but found that the noisy awakened people around her suddenly became quiet. Mu noticed a sharp gaze directed at everyone. The sight that was mixed with coldness and sharpness immediately made everyone feel like they were falling into an ice cave. When the scene calmed down, Ji Yufeng pushed up the frame on his nose, and a light screen flashed under his glasses, making it difficult to see his expression clearly. There is news that the heterogeneous cultists in Lannan City gathered in a large hall called the Dadayandi Entertainment Club. There are probably dozens of people, but it cannot be ruled out that there are powerful heretics beyond the A level among them. As soon as the statement came out, everyone who was already on tenterhooks immediately became frightened again. Most of the heterogeneous sects have extreme personalities, and they will do anything to gain power. Some even use heretics to perform some sorcery in exchange for abilities. This is the reason why the heterogeneous religion is not tolerated by many survivor bases. But this time, many search teams did not dare to make any noise, for fear of being targeted by Ji Yufeng. In the eyes of some awakened people, Ji Yufeng is a more terrifying existence than the zombie heresy. Ji Yufeng then looked at everyone and said, "This time the law enforcement team will work together with you to eradicate the heterogeneous church in Lannan City." For some reason, the more he looked at Ji Yufeng, the more agitated the flame demon lord in his body became. At this moment, Chu Nan, who was wearing sunglasses and dressed in a coquettish manner, complimented, "With Brother Ji here this time, isn't it easy to capture a heterogeneous church? Don't underestimate this action." The middle-aged man next to Ji Yufeng had a solemn expression on his face and said solemnly, "There is a high possibility that there are S-level heretics in the heterogeneous church in Lannan City." This sentence made the atmosphere at the scene even heavier, but Chu Nan still looked indifferent. "It's just an S-level monster, it's not like our brother Ji hasn't caught it before. That scary flame demon lord was so arrogant a few days ago, but he was still caught by brother Ji." When these words came out, Mu Chu's pupils shrank slightly and his mind was shocked. So that's it? Mu Chu finally understood why the emotions of the flame demon lord in his body became so agitated after seeing Ji Yufeng's face. It was Ji Yufeng who had captured the flame demon lord before. Mu Chu turned his head and slowly looked at the indifferent white-haired man with a playful look in his eyes. In this case, he had to get back at the place himself. After Chu Nan mentioned the name of Flame Demon Lord, Ji Yufeng's cold face finally showed a touch of emotion. He lowered his head and looked at the position of his arm. There was a hideous scar extending to his shoulder, and it was only a few inches away from tearing his neck. Ji Yufeng slowly explained, "Even capturing the flame demon consumed a lot of human resources in the base, and it was not something I could do alone. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord." Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 62. When mentioning the flame demon lord, not only Ji Yufeng's expression was moved, but even the search team who heard about it changed their faces. The flame demon lord has been entrenched outside the Yuhei base for a long time. His powerful strength is like a haze pressing on everyone's head, especially the search team has to be more cautious when going out to explore resources. Although this terrifying S-level heretic was captured alive after a tragic price, it took only more than a month for this terrible zombie monster to escape again, and once again became a psychological shadow for the search team members. Thinking that this mission is to fight with the servants of the demons of the heterogeneous church, and even the powerful existence of S-level will appear, these awakened people who are only B-level on average are quite nervous. Chu Nan mentioned the name of the flame demon lord in order to cheer people up, but he didn't expect to make the atmosphere more depressing. Seeing the atmosphere becoming more and more tense, Chu Nan hurriedly said, "We have Brother Ji to personally take action this time. Is there any heresy that we can't deal with?" Everyone suddenly realized that there was a powerful awakener in front of them, known as the White Death. Ji Yufeng swept his eyes over the many awakeners present. The search team members all shrank wherever his eyes went, fearing that they would be stared at by the White Death, and no one dared to look at him. No, there is another person. Ji Yufeng looked at Mu Qiu, who had a calm expression, and gave Ji Yufeng a meaningful smile. For some reason, Ji Yufeng had a strange feeling in an instant. This feeling was like being stared at by a terrifying heretic monster. Ji Yufeng frowned, pushed his eye sockets up to hide his thoughts, and turned his thin body to face the many search team members. Under the moonlight, his close-fitting white suit is more radiant, and with Ji Yufeng's cold and pale face, he looks like a messenger of the dead who has walked out of the endless purgatory. This is a battle. Ji Yufeng's cold words reached everyone's ears. It is a war that will definitely kill people. The cold words echoed in the ears of the search team. I will not force those who want to leave now, but correspondingly, all members who leave the team will deduct 100 merit points each. As soon as these words came out, all the search teams present had pupils shaking and their hearts trembling slightly. After each team goes out to explore, they will report the resources and intelligence they have found to the top management of Yuhei, and the corresponding team will receive a reward called merit points. In addition to being able to exchange crystal cores, weapons, and other common post-apocalyptic trading items, merit points can even be exchanged for information on some resource locations. It is a popular currency among the search teams of Yuhei base. It can be said that merit points are the foundation of their survival. Usually, going out to perform a mission can only earn a dozen merit points. This time, Ji Yufeng will deduct 100 points. Isn't this going to kill the search team? Many awakened people looked at each other with hesitation on their faces. In the end, no one stood up from the team and chose to leave. The reason is simple. What is the purpose of these teams searching the urban wasteland with great difficulty? Isn't it to use superpowers to live a good life in the end of the world? Now merit points are more important than money and power before the end of the world. How can they give up easily? They are naturally angry but dare not speak out about this kind of forced execution task. After all, the executor is the famous White Death God. Who dares to let the captain of the law enforcement team catch him? You know, this White Death God treats awakened people several times more cruelly than ordinary survivors. Ji Yufeng looked around and saw that no awakened people chose to leave. He gently supported the black frame of the glasses, and his eyes under the light curtain were unusually cold. After a thorough meeting, Ji Yufeng planned to wipe out the heterogeneous church strongholds in Lannan City the next day. In a tall building in the center of Lannan City, there were flickering lights in the dim corridor. The sound of wheels turning came from the deepest part of the corridor, and several figures appeared in the corner under the light. A pale, bloodless man in a red robe walked out from the deep corridor, followed by several black robes. The most surprising thing was that several purple-robed men pulled a huge cart surrounded by iron fences, almost blocking the entire wide corridor. The cart was covered by a black curtain, making it difficult to see what was inside. Beside the red-robed man was a hunchbacked purple-robed hooded man. "Are those people from Yuhei almost here?" the man in the red robe asked, his tone flat and hoarse. The hooded man in a purple robe beside him said, "They are already gathering search teams around them. It looks like they are serious this time. This time, the White Death of Yuhei is leading the team. It's a bit dangerous." Although he said so, the corners of his mouth under the purple hood were grinning upwards. "White Death. It's really exciting," the red-robed man murmured, and a strange smile gradually appeared on his face. While the two were talking, they had already arrived at a large elevator shaft. The black-robed men behind them also pulled up the cart covered with curtains. The purple-hooded man slowly pressed the button for the underground floor. There was a flash of light at the top of the elevator with a ding sound, and then it actually clicked and started to move. There is actually equipment to maintain power supply in the most dangerous center of this urban wasteland. As the elevator shaft slowly descended, the purple-robed man said to the red-robed man, people above have begun to ask about the experimental results here. Experimental results. The red-robed man's voice was hoarse and dry, and a smile appeared at the corners of his pale mouth. I think this is the best time to show the experimental results. The White Death will die here with his team. Another click sound. The elevator shaft has reached the bottom. The red-robed man led the crowd out of the elevator shaft. In the dark underground parking lot, a pair of scarlet bloodthirsty eyes were staring blankly at the front. The men beside him turned on the flashlight, and saw that the owners of these scarlet eyes were actually ragged and bloody horrible zombies. These zombies stood quietly in the empty parking lot like a line, looking like frozen wax figures. In the dim and damp environment, one could only see their dull and hollow eyes and hideous faces with the help of a flashlight. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 63. The red-robed man waved his hand and gave an order, and several black-robed men behind him immediately understood and lifted the curtain of the steel cage. Then, an even more shocking scene occurred. It was seen that the people locked in the steel cage were actually more than a dozen disheveled, pale and thin human survivors. The hands and feet of these human survivors were tied with thick ropes, and their mouths were blocked with tape. They looked terrified and their faces were full of tears. Several black-robed men threw these survivors from the cage to the ground. A black-robed man took out a dagger from his waist and cut the arms of several survivors. Crimson blood gushed out from the wound. The air was instantly filled with a strong smell of blood. The hundreds of zombies were instantly ignited with blood, and their eyes looked fiercely at the dozen survivors who fell to the ground. But the strange thing is that even if saliva flowed from the corners of their mouths and the blood in the depths of their pupils became more and more intense, these zombies did not move at all. Faced with the delicious food delivered to their doorstep, these man-eating monsters froze to the side. It was as if they were artificially fixed in place. But then, the red-robed man gently snapped his fingers. Snap! In an instant, as if some mysterious switch was turned on, these zombies almost simultaneously launched an attack with their fangs and claws, and their target was the dozen human survivors lying on the ground. Hundreds of zombies waved their claws and surrounded the dozen people with hideous faces, as if they were devouring them. Blood splattered, screams continued, and in a moment there was only a large pool of blood on the ground. But the red-robed man and his group behind him seemed to be accustomed to it, with a morbid smile on their faces. Look forward to it, the great feast is about to be staged. The moonlight covered by dark clouds sprinkled down, bringing a ray of light to the dark city. The moonlight shone on the tall building, and the dark sign that had long been covered with dust had 7 big characters written on it, Deshandi Entertainment Club. Miu opened his eyes, only to find that he was being tightly entangled by Yui like an octopus. The girl's delicate arms were pressed against Miu's chest, and she was breathing softly. The girl's appearance was always so beautiful, but her sleeping posture was a bit unsightly. Miu didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and he gently put the girl's jade arm aside with his backhand, and slowly stood up. It was late at night, and the team was resting in a tent in the square. Since seeing Ji Yufeng today, the consciousness of the flame demon lord in Miu's body has become violent. It was not just an angry emotion, but more of a crazy greed. That's right, the flame demon in the body was greedily opening its mouth, wanting to devour Ji Yufeng's flesh, his blood, and his supernatural powers. This Ji Yufeng is worthy of being called the White Death God, who can make the flame demon so eager to devour him. Miu will naturally settle the old account with Ji Yufeng about the flame demon lord, but before that, he must first arrive at the Great World Entertainment Club and complete the task assigned to him by the system. Before that, it is better not to make trouble. Miu put on his clothes and walked out of the tent. The late summer night was already slightly cool. At this time, in the middle of the night, the camp was already silent, and only the unburned bonfire was still flickering with sparks. Because of the protection of the purple light curtain that isolates the outside world, people can also enjoy a moment of peace in the city ruins full of crises. Mu-Chiu, who had nothing to do, walked to the pavilion in the center of the square. The bright moonlight in the sky seemed to be the only light illuminating this wasteland. When he walked to the pavilion, Mu-Chiu found that there was already a beautiful figure here, with a curvy figure, a beautiful face, and an elegant and mature temperament. This person is the role model of the Virgin Mary in Mu-Chiu's heart, Dr. Lu Qingfei. However, unlike the usually elegant and dignified Virgin Mary Lu, at this moment, Lu Qingfei looked melancholy and absent-minded. Her slender back looked very thin, and there was a trace of tears in the corner of her eyes. Seeing this, Mu-Chiu stepped forward and smiled. "What? Is the Virgin Mary so sentimental today?" Mu-Chiu did not deliberately make footsteps when he came, but Lu Qingfei seemed to have just reacted and was startled by the sudden voice. After finding out that the person was Mu-Chiu, concubine Lu Qing was relieved, patted her chest, wiped the tears from her eyes, and replied, "It's Mu-Chiu, why aren't you sleeping so late?" Mu-Chiu noticed that concubine Lu Qing was abnormal, and asked with a smile, "Why do you look absent-minded?" Concubine Lu Qing hesitated for a moment, but still confessed to Mu-Chiu, "It's because of my fiancé." Mu-Chiu suddenly remembered that the base camp of the heterogeneous sect to be wiped out this time was in the Great Heaven and Earth Entertainment Club, and concubine Lu Qing's husband was lost in the Great Heaven and Earth Entertainment Club. Now concubine Lu Qing's husband must have fallen into the hands of the heterogeneous sect. But he heard concubine Lu Qing said to herself, "He is the president of a company, and we met at a lecture in the university." Mu-Chiu had nothing to do, so he simply listened to the story of the Holy Mother Lu to satisfy his hunger. The story is quite cliched. Basically it's about the tall, rich, and handsome man pursuing the fair, rich and beautiful woman, and then the two began to talk about marriage. He left Yuhei City 3 days before the end of the world. I haven't seen him since that day. And the day when the apocalypse breaks out, there is still a month before our wedding as agreed. As Lu Qingfei said this, tears slid down her eyes. He is too straightforward. He must be in great pain after falling into the hands of the alien section. I am afraid that even his life and death are unknown now. It can be seen that Lu Qingfei, a sentimental woman, is really worried about the safety of her husband. But Mu-Chiu naturally doesn't care about this. What he really cares about is the power he gets after arriving at the check-in location. Mu-Chiu smiled slightly, took off his windbreaker and put it on Lu Qingfei. Then, he said meaningfully, "Don't worry, you will never know what the result will be until the last step." Lu Qingfei thought that Mu-Chiu's words were touched by her and were comforting herself. What she didn't expect was that this man who treated his enemies like a devil and was extremely cruel actually had such a kind side. "Thank you, Mu-Chiu." Lu Qingfei's face was touched. How could Mu-Chiu not see that Lu Qingfei misunderstood him, but he obviously didn't want to make any more excuses on this matter. He leaned against the column of the pavilion, looked up at the sky, and said softly, "I have an inexplicable premonition that tomorrow will be very interesting. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord." Author, Mo-Xian. Chapter 64. A zombie monster that was as big as a gorilla and as strong as a gorilla rose from the ground, and suddenly trampled an ordinary zombie next to it under its feet. The ground made of asphalt stone sank deeply in an instant, and a pool of scarlet blood flowed out from the cracked ground. The giant zombie beat its chest and roared, then walked away with heavy steps. The smell of blood instantly stimulated the surrounding zombies. Several zombies leaned towards the corpse in the cracks in the ground with ferocious faces. Suddenly, a black figure flashed past, knocking those zombies away in an instant. This turned out to be a mutated zombie with sharp claws like sharp knives. The mutated zombie was extremely fast, picking up the broken corpses on the ground and turning them into an afterimage and disappearing into the deep alley. Roar. A low groan of torn vocal cords came from the neighborhood. Groups of zombies are scattered throughout the neighborhood, rubbing shoulders with each other, mixed with all kinds of weird and bizarre things. After a night of fermentation, many zombie monsters that were originally sparse on the street due to the cleanup by the law enforcement team gathered again. The streets in the city center are even more crowded with zombies. Their clothes were in tatters, covered with old blood stains, their faces were ferocious, their eye sockets were protruding, and some even had deformed bodies, as if they were ferocious beasts in the jungle that preyed on people. Woo buzz. Suddenly, the violent roar of the engine and the rolling sound of the wheels came from a distance, shaking the gravel on the ground and causing sand and rocks to fly. I saw dozens of dark green Hummer military vehicles driving on the street in the distance. More than a dozen Army green Hummer Jeeps were speeding along. The vehicles also had traces of modification, like steel beasts driving in the jungle. Behind a row of military vehicles, there were more than a dozen vehicles of different models. There are also well-armed off-road vehicles, luxurious and cool sports cars, a few galloping horses. What's even more ridiculous is that there are several huge and extremely fast yellow forklifts in the group of vehicles. The drivers inside are also wearing vests and overalls, just like migrant workers who have just left the construction site. The loud sound of rolling wheels instantly alarmed the zombies on the entire street, and the hungry man-eating monsters immediately came out in groups, rushing towards the group of cars in the distance. Deep in the wide street, the black zombie heads were connected together. From a distance, they looked like a bloody wave rushing toward the convoy. At this moment, a row of square gun barrels rose above the military vehicle walking at the front of the vehicle. Boom! Thick smoke rose from the barrel, and a series of red shells sprayed out after a loud noise. Whoosh! Right in front of the corpse group, a huge mutated zombie was instantly hit by a cannonball. After a loud boom, thick black smoke and hot firelight shook the entire neighborhood. The remnant power of the explosion even spread for tens of meters, and the surrounding zombie heretics were attacked by the wave of shell explosions. In an instant, charred corpses and blood clots splashed into the sky. Instead of cowering, the remaining zombies were stimulated by the smell of blood in the air and rushed towards the group of cars waving their ferocious deformed bodies. Rush over. At this time, Ji Yufeng's emotionless and indifferent voice came from the transmitters in all the cars. Almost at the same time as this order was issued, the front bumpers of more than a dozen military Humvees suddenly flipped into spiked steel bars. The speed of the tires was also getting faster and faster. With the engine roaring, the Humvee military vehicle rushed directly towards the tide of corpses in front, like a row of brave warriors charging into battle. The zombie monsters that were so ferocious and terrifying in the eyes of ordinary people seemed like paper in front of these steel beasts. The sharp thorns and spears instantly penetrated the fragile flesh of the zombies. The extreme collision was accompanied by tearing and cutting the body. The modified iron tires were like the tracks of a tank, easily crushing the rushing zombies. Thick smoke and blood mist together create a scene full of violent aesthetics. This scene really shocked the search team members at the rear. When a team of several people like them explores the ruins of the city, there is never a time when they don't hide their heads and show their tails. They are careful not to reveal any movement, otherwise they will face an overwhelming and terrifying tide of corpses. Nowadays, the law enforcement team is so violent and forcibly carves out a path among the corpses everywhere, which really surprises these awakened ones. Dear me, is this law enforcement team so powerful? The fat man held the steering wheel and looked at the mountain of corpses and blood in front of him with astonishment in his eyes. Wei Linger looked as if she was expecting it. This is Ji Yufeng's usual style, whether it's dealing with zombies or humans. Her brother Wei Ying and Ji Yufeng were colleagues, and Wei Linger naturally learned a lot about Ji Yufeng from Wei Ying. Wei Linger became rarely serious and said calmly, It is said that when the law enforcement team was first established, there were proposals such as a combat team, a corpse-killing team, a rescue team, etc., but in the end Ji Yufeng resisted all opinions and named it the law enforcement team. Ji Yufeng's law enforcement team not only enforces the order of Yuhei, but also the laws of the entire world. Listening to Wei Ling'er's words, Mu Qiu could not imagine that the name of this law enforcement team had such origin. Do you follow the laws of the world? Mu Qiu suddenly chuckled and said, I have to say that Ji Yufeng is really brave this time. Yes, without such courage, how can one be worthy of the title of White Death? The war in front was still raging. Under the ruthless collision of the steel chariot, the corpse tide had been breached, but there were still countless zombies behind who were not afraid of death. To be precise, they had long been dead, so they were not afraid of death. The roof of the military vehicle in the front row was opened, and the soldiers of the law enforcement team simply took out machine guns to cover the fire. The flames at the muzzle sprayed wildly, and countless bullets hit the corpse tide like a river pouring down. A large number of zombies were hit by the swift bullets, and their heads exploded like watermelons, blood splashed in the air, and blood rain soaked the earth. A passage was opened in an instant for the dense corpse tide all over the street, and in the middle of the corpse group were dozens of vehicles carrying living people. In the middle of the dozen Hummer military vehicles rushing in the front, Ji Yufeng, wearing a white suit, was sitting in the car to preside over the overall situation. A voice came from the communicator in the car, Captain, we have opened a gap in the zombie tide. At this rate, we will reach our destination soon. Hearing this, Ji Yufeng, who was sitting in the co-pilot seat, did not look happy at all. His slightly pale lips slowly uttered cold words, something is wrong. An adjutant beside him asked in confusion, Captain, we got rid of the zombie tide so easily, this should be a good thing. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 65. Ji Yufeng did not speak, but ordered the team to move on. The entire law enforcement team's process of cleaning up the zombies was extremely smooth, without even losing a single manpower. This made the search team that followed the law enforcement team very excited and gained confidence in the next plan to wipe out the heretic religion. Only a few people are not optimistic about this seemingly good situation. Mu Qiu looked through the window at the terrifying tide of corpses crushed by the powerful methods of the law enforcement team, with an intriguing smile on her lips. When he was the Fire Lord, one of the few memory fragments happened to include the scene of the zombies fighting against the human army. The scene at that time was far from as one-sided as it is now. There are tens of thousands of zombie groups, powerful, strange and terrifying heretics, and a zombie king who will definitely appear in the zombie group. The presence of any one of these factors is enough to cause these well-equipped search teams to suffer heavy losses. And here, none of them exist. Mu Qiu had a vague feeling that there was a greater danger ahead, waiting for these human groups filled with the joy of victory. But of course Mu Qiu wouldn't care about this kind of problem. On the contrary, he still had a special expectation in his heart. After all, the unknown is the most interesting adventure. Next to her, Chi-Chi stared curiously at the scene outside the car. This was the first time she had seen such a large-scale zombie invasion. Mu Qiu rubbed the girl's head and chuckled, so, the situation here is much scarier than your place, right? The over there that Mu Qiu was referring to was naturally the world that Chi-Chi originally lived in. It was also invaded by some kind of apocalypse virus, but the extent was far less terrifying than the zombie virus in this world. The girl leaned against Mu Qiu's side, not showing the slightest fear even when faced with the terrifying zombies outside. Chi-Chi nodded cutely, they have lost their original consciousness, just like a puppet without a body. The convoy rushed through the violent corpse tide like a storm, and soon left the center of the most prosperous street in Lannan City with a group of search teams behind it. But they didn't notice that in the shadow of the alley next to the street, A disc-shaped flying device was flashing red dots on the screen, quietly monitoring the convoy's every move. The scorching sun was in the sky, and the sunlight was so direct that it made the earth dry and cracked. The old urban area has become dilapidated because it has been lifeless for too long, and the high-rise buildings that once stood are now gathering dust. The trees and weeds growing wildly along the street, some green plants have spread to the road, and thick vine roots are embedded in old buildings. Dozens of vehicles of various shapes were parked in the middle of the road, and directly in front of them was the target of this encirclement and suppression mission, the BasedonanAnime Entertainment Club. Many law enforcement team soldiers and awakened people from the search team stepped out of the car at this moment. At first glance, there were hundreds of them. Since the outbreak of the apocalypse, such a large number of humans have rarely appeared openly in such urban ruins. Miu looked up at the huge building with more than 10 floors in front of her. It was hard to imagine that this was just a high-end club. The fat man was amazed at the sight. These rich people are so good, the entertainment venues are so high-end, but I have never seen them before. It's like a little palace. Not far away, Chunan, who was dressed like a slut, bit a rose in his mouth and said with disdain, "Look at you, you look like you have never seen the world, you bumpkin." When the fat man heard this, he smiled cheekily and said, "Yeah, I'm not like some rich second-generation losers who rely on their father. They are nothing after leaving their father, and even in the apocalypse, they don't forget to dress up and be so coquettish." You. Chunan was instantly angry, but it was difficult to get angry in front of Ji Yufeng. "Captain, all members of the law enforcement team and search team have arrived." At the front of the team, a young man wearing a military cap walked up to Ji Yufeng and reported. Ji Yufeng nodded, but looked towards the entrance directly in front. There should have been a row of revolving glass doors, but at some point they were converted into thick iron doors. I don't know what kind of material the iron gate is made of. Even if the soldiers from the law enforcement team fired machine guns, they could only leave light scratches. "Captain, why don't we use explosive devices?" a member of the law enforcement team suggested beside him. "No. There are still many living survivors inside." Upon hearing that the entire building was about to be blown up, Lu Qingfei immediately stepped forward to stop it. Her fiancé was most likely trapped in the building. At this time, the middle-aged man who released the purple light curtain last night said, "The BasedonanAnime Entertainment Club is the largest entertainment center in Lannan City. Celebrities from all walks of life often gather here. I am afraid that the survivors inside have been taken hostage by the heterogeneous cult." The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, then reminded him, "Boss Zhang's nephew seems to have disappeared here. Before leaving, Boss Zhang told us to try our best to save his nephew." The Boss Zhang in the man's mouth is naturally one of the 3 leaders of Yuhei base, Zhang Qingwei, who was a wealthy Shangjia man in the apocalypse. Just when the team members were having different opinions and hesitating, Ji Yufeng suddenly raised his hand. Everyone calmed down immediately, but heard Ji Yufeng say, "No need, it's already opened." Just as the voice fell, a click sound suddenly came from the iron door not far away. Everyone was shocked. When they heard the sound, they looked at the heavy iron door and found that it had quietly opened at some point. Behind the door was their ultimate goal of the strip, the heterogeneous church. Many members, whether they were law enforcement teams or search teams that were temporarily summoned, looked at the dark door and looked at each other in bewilderment. Is this not an empty city plan? The fat man swallowed his throat, feeling uneasy. But this time no one responded to him, because the others were also very dumb. A discerning person could see that there must be a trap inside, but now they had lost their minds in the face of the mission. Ji Yufeng's face was still indifferent, and he ordered, "Follow me in." After that, he actually walked into the building alone. At this point, everyone could only obey orders, and with the White Death God in front of them, everyone was somewhat comforted. However, the members of the law enforcement team in the back were all armed and ready to go at the slightest danger. The awakened members of the search team also looked around vigilantly. They had a natural intuition about danger after walking on the tightrope for a long time. Miu and others followed the law enforcement team. Miu looked up at the huge building that towered into the sky. He was already looking forward to it. New power. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 66. Facing the unknown danger ahead, Ji Yufeng had already made arrangements for the entire team last night. Walking in the front row were the law enforcement members with guns and live ammunition, and around them were the awakened ones from the search team who were hunting behind them. If there is even the slightest movement nearby, these experienced awakened ones will wait for an opportunity like jungle beasts. At the core of the team are the awakened ones like Lu Qingfei and Su Wen, who have auxiliary abilities or whose own strength is not outstanding. A team of hundreds of people was ready to go. Led by a white-haired man in a suit, they slowly entered a high-rise building called Daishandi Entertainment Club. After passing through the heavy iron gate, once you enter, you will see an extremely empty hall. Even if hundreds of people rush in, it is still spacious. The counters, tables and chairs in the hall had been cleared away at some point. From a distance, the red carpet on the ground seemed to be soaked in blood. The silent hall became even more profound under the haze that enveloped everyone's hearts. What's strange is that the entire building has a hollow design. In the middle of the hall stands a thick column with several people hugging it. It is carved with dragons and phoenixes, and is meticulously crafted with exquisite craftsmanship. When I looked up, I saw that the central part of the hall was covered with dozens of wide steps covered with red carpet. The hall is surrounded by numbered boxes, but the doors of these boxes are also made of fine iron and locked. The whole building has been artificially modified. Chen Weiguo used to be a decoration worker, and he immediately saw the clues after glancing around. There was no entertainment atmosphere in the entire building, and instead there was an extremely solid silence in the air, and an unpredictable and weird atmosphere. Everyone be on alert. The man in a military hat next to Ji Yufeng waved, signaling for the team to move forward. Miu was walking at the front of the team, looking at the interior of the building that had been transformed beyond recognition, feeling an inexplicable feeling in her heart. Just speaking of this empty and deep hall, the walls are curved and surrounded by a huge column in the middle. It felt to Miu less like a reception club and more like a gladiatorial arena. Ba bang bang. Just as a team of several hundred people were waiting in formation and were about to go upstairs, a burst of clapping suddenly came from all directions in the hall. Welcome everyone from Yuhei to visit the Daishandi Entertainment Club. The sudden sound accurately entered the minds of everyone present. Spiritual transmission. Being able to transmit words into the minds of hundreds of people present at the same time, it is obvious that this person's supernatural power has great attainments in the soul. They are from the heterologous church. With the enemy in front of them, everyone's eyes instantly became wary. But I heard this ethereal but hoarse voice say, everyone in the world is ignorant. They regard the gift given to mankind by the Creator as a sin. It is simply pitiful and pitiful. As the slightly older voice echoed in everyone's minds, a purple-robed figure seemed to appear in front of everyone's eyes. The figure was stooped and wearing a hood, making it difficult to see the face. Miu looked at the purple-robed figure that appeared out of thin air, her eyes burning brightly. He had seen similar clothing in Yuhei base. That was the power of the 12 talismans he obtained after signing in. After using the sheep talisman for the first time to leave his body, he saw a similar figure in a tower in Yuhei. It seems that the heterogeneous religion has invaded the interior of Jade Sea, Miu thought to herself. The Creator pities life, gives alien species, and baptizes all living beings with alien species. This is the change of times and the sublimation of species. Come, accept us, accommodate us, join us. As the hoarse voice continued to reach the ears, a feeling of love came to their hearts, and the awakened people present seemed to have found a home in their hearts. They couldn't help but stretch out their arms, wanting to hold the warmth in front of them. Kill. Suddenly, a loud shout came directly into everyone's minds like a bolt from the blue, directly shaking many team members who had fallen into some kind of slumber to wake up. Only then did everyone realize that they had just fallen into some kind of mental control and were almost falling into the trap of a cult. Looking up again, at some point, a purple-robed figure was floating above the hall. Someone in the law enforcement team reacted, immediately pointed their gun at the figure in the air, and pulled the trigger. The bullet shot out with a bang and hit the purple-robed man in the air, passing through the air and into the wall. It's an illusion. Some awakened people saw that the method used by the purple-robed man was nothing more than a spiritual illusion. Ignorant fool. The purple-robed man sighed softly, God's subordinates will give you salvation. As the purple-robed man's words became farther and farther away, his figure suspended in the air gradually dimmed, and finally dissipated in the air. TCH, pretending to be a ghost. The fat man mocked disdainfully. In his opinion, this was just the fact that the Church of Alien was on the verge of death and was still being stubborn. Ji Yufeng in front said to the middle-aged man beside him, "Did you sense it?" The middle-aged man opened his eyes and nodded. The mental fluctuations come from the top floor, which should be the headquarters of the heterogeneous religion. Suddenly, Su Wen, who was in the center of the team, twitched her ears as if she heard something strange, so many scary sounds. What? The awakened people around were confused. But Su Wen raised her hand tremblingly and pointed to a wall of the box, and her voice trembled, they are here. At this moment, a strange sound of mechanism was suddenly heard in the box around the wall of the hall. With a loud boom, everyone turned back suddenly, only to find that the door they came in through was already closed. As the doors of the box opened automatically, the existence inside was also revealed to everyone. Roar. Hiss. A series of dull and hoarse low moans came from the depths of the box, and then a pair of red and bloodthirsty eyes suddenly opened. This is. Everyone's eyes were full of surprise. In these closed box doors, a group of bloodthirsty and terrifying zombie heretics were imprisoned. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 67. A pair of bloodshot scarlet eyes walked out of the box, exuding a strong smell of blood. The boxes around the hall were opened one after another, and those who walked out were all terrifying heretics with ferocious faces. They surrounded everyone, and the number of them turned out to be in the hundreds. Oh no, why do I think I've seen this scene before? The fat man looked at the many monsters that appeared from the box in astonishment, and the corners of his mouth twitched. They had also experienced being surrounded by zombie monsters not long ago, when they were framed by Makan and his group. It's just that the number of heretics this time is far more terrifying than last time. The number of hundreds of terrifying zombie monsters is outrageous, and their levels are all at least sea level or above. I finally understand why there are so few zombies in the city. These zombie monsters are actually kept in the building by the alien church. Just when everyone was surprised, the zombie heretics rushed towards everyone like a tide, as if they had seen some delicious food. The members of the law enforcement team reacted, pulled the trigger of the thermal weapon in their hands, spitted out tongues of fire, and fired wildly at the zombies rushing around. But these zombies are much harder to deal with than ordinary zombies in the city. Some of the zombies were so huge that their whole bodies were covered with thick fat. Bullets had no effect on them and were ejected instantly. Some zombies are extremely fast and have a keen sense of danger. They can easily dodge the overwhelming bullets as their figures sway, leap into the air and bite the crowd. What's more, the terrifying alien spits out dark green mucus, and the parts of the team members that hit it are instantly corroded and their flesh and blood are blurred. But the combat power on the human side is equally impressive. The fat man was holding a machete. After images of his fat figure appeared while moving at high speed. When he appeared again, he was in front of a zombie and slashed hard at the back of the head and neck. Although Chen Weiguo's ability was a defensive barrier, the range it could extend was quite limited. He simply set up a wide barrier around the law enforcement team soldiers beside him, and resisted by firing machine guns with the soldiers. Playboy Chunan has a unique ability. He took a rose from his mouth, broke off a petal and threw it into the air. The petal cut off a zombie's neck like a sharp blade. Mu Chiu, protect Sister King Fei and the others. A cooing sound sounded from behind Mu Chiu, and Wei Linger had transformed into a cat lady at some point. She jumped up and rushed toward the corpses in front of her with her sharp claws. The Catwoman transformed by Wei Linger is extremely flexible and agile, and with her petite stature, it is difficult for some slow-moving zombies to touch the corners of her clothes. She swoops in and out of the zombie wave with a heroic appearance. How can you let Sister Linger stand out alone at this time? A seductive voice reached Mu Chiu's ears. Mu Chiu turned around and saw Lu Qianqian, who was wearing a red cheongsam and had a slim figure, walking forward on cat steps. As Lu Qianqian moved, a strange energy surged from her body, and soon 3 fiery red fox tails appeared behind her. And a pair of fox-like ears appeared on the top of Lu Qianqian's head. Lu Qianqian's superpower is actually related to foxes. A Catwoman and a vixen, no wonder they don't like each other. Mu Chiu can probably understand the reason why Wei Linger and Lu Qianqian are in tit for tat. Many of the awakened people in the search teams around him also released their own powers and showed off their magical powers. The bodies of some awakened people instantly swelled, their clothes were torn, their golden hair stood up due to invisible explosive energy, and their palms could also shoot blue qigong. Some bodies assimilated with the rocks, and their skin became dark, turning into a huge stone man, and bravely crashed into the group of corpses. Next, a birdman with wings, an awakened person whose body can be split into pieces, an awakened person whose body can stretch like a spring, all kinds of weird abilities appeared in front of Mu Chiu's eyes. Mu Chiu stood there, watching everyone's wonderful performances as if appreciating a show, nodding her head from time to time. At this time, a ferocious giant dog opened its bloody mouth and bit into Mu Chiu's position. Mu Chiu stood sluggishly, but at the moment the giant dog was about to jump off, a long and narrow ice pick pierced the giant dog's forehead. The giant dog's bloodthirsty eyes widened, a wisp of blood spattered from the back of its head, and its huge body fell down in an instant. Mu Chiu saw it interestingly, and suddenly wanted to loosen up her muscles and bones. The black windbreaker stood up without any wind, and Mu Chiu slowly walked forward. As he moved, Mu Chiu's palms closed together, and crystal blue ice mist came out in an instant, gradually gathering into a long knife. Mu Chiu's pace immediately quickened, ice crystals condensed under her feet, and Mu Chiu actually stepped on the ice crystals and rose into the sky. A zombie with twisted limbs but a flexible body and red skin jumped up from the ground, and attacked Mu Chiu with a pair of extremely sharp claws. Mu Chiu leapt into the air, and the sharp sword and claws collided with each other, and sparks flew everywhere. The next second, the long knife cut off the zombie's claws with a click, and the flexible zombie's body was also dismembered by Mu Chiu's knife. On the other side, several zombies attacked Lu Qianqian, who was wearing a cheongsam. Lu Qianqian had a charming smile on her lips, and several red tails composed of supernatural energy behind her were commanded by her like arms. Like the tentacles of an octopus, several zombies were instantly whipped away by Lu Qianqian's fox-like tail, and a sly smile flashed across Lu Qianqian's eyes. At this moment, a short figure flashed behind her, splashing a dark green liquid. Lu Qianqian turned around in fear and wanted to dodge, but it was obviously too late. She subconsciously closed her eyes. At this moment, a black figure flashed, accompanied by a gorgeous blue knife light. Lu Qianqian opened her eyes, but found that she was being held in Mu Qiu's arms. In front of Mu Qiu, there stood a blue ice wall, on which there were still traces of mucus corrosion. And the zombie was also frozen in an instant. Lu Qianqian realized that it was Mu Qiu who saved her, and smiled brightly, "Brother Mu Qiu, thanks to you for saving my sister." Lu Qianqian was about to say something, but Mu Qiu gently put her down, and in a flash, he rushed to the group of zombies on the side. Lu Qianqian chopped her feet hard, and then vented her anger on the zombies around her. In the fierce battle between hundreds of human awakeners and zombie heretics, a black figure holding an ice-blue longsword kept flashing on the battlefield like a walking god of death. When the sword fell, several zombies' heads fell. Ji Yufeng, who had been motionless, looked at the black-robed figure who was at ease in the zombie group. There was no expression on his indifferent face, but a light curtain flashed on his black-framed glasses. The middle-aged man next to him exclaimed, as expected of an awakener of the elemental system, "His strength is so strong. In a few years, he will probably become a Wang Daipan again." Ji Yufeng narrowed his eyes under his glasses, and no one knew what he was thinking. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 68. Although there were many zombies that suddenly rushed into the hall from the box, and their levels were generally B level and C level, the humans in Yuhei were not vegetarians after all. Not to mention the many guns and powerful awakeners of the law enforcement team, the search team that was temporarily summoned was also full of experienced veterans, and their levels were also around B level on average. Therefore, although the whole battle was not smooth, it was much easier than expected. Even Ji Yufeng, who was the highest combat power of S level, did not take action throughout the whole process, but just stood aside and watched coldly. The battle gradually came to an end. The originally empty and dark hall was now covered with blood. The high-grade blankets spread all over the ground were darker red, and the ground was full of zombies and broken human limbs. The survivors and law enforcement soldiers who ended the battle looked at the corpses on the ground breathlessly, and for a moment they couldn't help but feel fortunate that just being alive was the greatest luxury. Soon, under the gaze of everyone, Ji Yufeng walked to the stairs, looked at the deep and wide steps, and slowly said, "Those who are alive, follow me up." The white suit was spotless, and the indifferent expression on his face seemed that the cruel battle of hell just now had nothing to do with him. At this time, even if there were casualties, everyone naturally did not dare to be afraid. Instead, they were inspired by the bloodiness of the battle just now, and followed Ji Yufeng to rush up the stairs. As soon as they went upstairs, everyone obviously found that the atmosphere here was more gloomy than the first floor. It was a clear day outside, but the entire second floor was impenetrable. The dim corridor seemed so dark and quiet, just like the lingering haze suppressed in everyone's heart. "Wow, this floor is really big, it must be 2 or 3 times the size of a normal floor," the fat man kept exclaiming as he walked in the team. There was a bandage wrapped around his shoulder. This was scratched by the zombies in the battle just now. Now it is getting better under Lu Qingfei's treatment. Mu Qiu looked up at the layout of the second floor. The height of one floor alone was enough for several adults, and ordinary people could not even reach it. It's a good place for killing. Mu Qiu keenly sensed an unusual smell in the air. "Watch out for human survivors," said an officer of the law enforcement team. But at this moment, a series of low roars suddenly came from a distance. From the dozens of boxes on the second floor, dark figures mixed with bloody smells also rushed out. Everyone was alert instantly. There were only dozens of figures this time, but the rest of the team was alert. Because these dozens of zombie monsters, without exception, all reached the B level. These zombies have all shown some degree of alienation in their bodies. It is hard to say how powerful they have become, but their temperament will only become more brutal. Zombies are fearless and have no sense of pain. It is even more difficult to deal with them at the B level, not to mention that there are dozens of mutant zombies to deal with this time. Dozens of mutant zombies rushed into the front of the law enforcement team at a very fast speed. Most of the members of these law enforcement teams were ordinary people who had not awakened. They had no chance to react when attacked by these terrifying zombies with extremely fast speed. Several of them were torn and bitten by the terrifying zombies in an instant, and blood splattered. The awakened people around almost all reacted in the next moment and launched their abilities to attack those violent mutant zombies. Mewtwo did not attack again this time, but just stood aside quietly to appreciate the wonderful battle next to him. Although these deformed mutant zombies were extremely fast and their levels were all terrifying B-level existences, any search team in the ruins outside would be wiped out. But there were many powerful awakened people here, and even many A-level masters were far from showing their true strength. Sure enough, before long, dozens of mutant zombies were also killed by many awakened people. It's just that this time, the casualties were obviously much more, but they were all ordinary humans in the law enforcement team, and the awakened ones were more injured. Fortunately, there were also many people with healing abilities in the team, and in just a few moments, the wounded were all healed. Oh my God, there won't be a group of such monsters on every floor. The fat man looked at the stairs in front of him with fear and muttered. This is also the idea of many humans in the team. Anyone with a discerning eye can see that this is a trap set by the heterogeneous cult, in order to consume their strength layer by layer. If this continues, I'm afraid that by the time they reach the top floor, only 1 in 10 people in their team will remain. I can understand why there are so few high-level zombies in the city, although I don't know what means they use to control these monsters. But at this moment, these terrifying and powerful beings are probably gathered in this building. Chen Weiguo was also injured, and he smiled bitterly and said what he thought. But at this point, there is obviously no way out. The middle-aged man beside Ji Yufeng whispered, "This operation is strictly confidential, but the heterogeneous cult has arranged it so thoroughly. I'm afraid, there is a traitor among us." Ji Yufeng pushed the frame of his glasses and said nothing, but led the way to the stairs. The following situation was as expected by everyone. There were a large number of zombie heretics ambushing on each floor, and the strength of the monsters on each floor was constantly increasing. The soldiers of the law enforcement team have lost most of their lives, and even the awakened members of the search team that was temporarily assembled have suffered varying degrees of casualties. Even the awakened members who were good at healing in the team could not treat such fatal injuries in time. At the back, even the awakened members of the law enforcement team beside Ji Yufeng had to fight to save the casualties in the team. When they rushed to a certain floor, everyone's clothes were already bloody, their faces were a little tired, and the weapons in their hands were also covered with blood. And somewhere on the top floor, dozens of figures in long robes were watching the killing feast of humans and monsters downstairs through the monitor. The final picture was frozen on the picture of the team recovering and healing on a certain floor. He. A red-robed man had a pale smile on his face, and 2 sharp teeth stretched out from the corners of his mouth. "Take a good rest, after all, the fun is still to come. Behind is the precious gift I left for you." You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 69. After several fierce battles, everyone in the team had tired looks on their faces. Continuous killings gradually made these time-tested awakened ones numb. Gradually, they only knew how to wave the weapons in their hands to hit the zombies attacking them, and behind them, dense numbers of terrifying monsters followed one after another. Only the captain of the law enforcement team, Ji Yufeng, who was always at the front of the team, never took action. He even watched the awakened people around him die in front of him several times, but he didn't care. This made the awakened people in the search team angry but helpless at the same time. After all, the title of White Death was enough to scare them into silence. Everyone stepped onto a certain floor of the building with wary eyes on their faces. There was a nameplate on the top that read 13th floor. The entire club building is only 14 stories high. During this period, they have never discovered a human survivor. But what puzzles Muchu is that until now, the system in his mind has not responded at all. Is it possible that I have to reach the top floor by myself to meet the sign-in requirements? So far, there are only dozens of people left in the team that originally numbered hundreds. And most of these people are people with awakened abilities whose strength has reached level B or above. The rest of the human beings have all died tragically at the hands of mutated zombie monsters. According to previous experience, the monsters in this floor must be extremely powerful. After all, the terrifying existence of A-level zombies has appeared in the previous floors. Everyone was ready to fight to the death with the monsters on this floor, but when they stepped into the floor, they found that the entire floor seemed extremely quiet. After a while, no ferocious monster roared out of the door. Everything seemed to be back to how it was when everyone first entered the club. The oppressive atmosphere instantly surrounded everyone's hearts, and the previous scenes full of killings still lingered in everyone's hearts, and it was difficult to dissipate. As time went by, finally some awakened people could no longer bear the heavy psychological pressure, howling and rushing towards a room with the machete in their hands. No one present, including Ji Yufeng, tried to stop him. After a while, the awakened person who rushed into the room suddenly ran back, shouting, "There are people! There are survivors!" As soon as they heard the news that there were survivors, everyone immediately showed joy, and dozens of figures filed into the room. As soon as they entered the room, a huge bathing pool of more than 100 square meters came into view. It seems that this room is actually a man-made hot spring bath. However, only a few rays of light from the window came through the bath at this moment, and the original water source in the pool had long since dried up. Several human beings in tattered clothes, with yellow faces and skinny muscles, tied with a few hemp ropes, were huddled in the corner and shivering. Ji Yufeng led the team towards the survivors in the corner, and the middle-aged man among them asked, "We are from the Yuhei safety zone who came to rescue you. What is happening here?" Several people seemed to have been abused for a long time, and their quarrels were a little awkward. Only one young man said in a hoarse voice, "Yes, they are people from the heterogeneous religion. They caught us here and want to keep us as captives, monster food." As soon as this statement came out, everyone immediately frowned. By using living people as food for zombies, this heterogeneous religion has indeed become insane and insane. But I heard the young man say again, "There are survivors captured by them in other rooms on this floor, some have already." At this point, the young man began to cough violently, and it was obvious that he was struggling to speak at this moment. "Those lunatics! When I catch them, I will cut them into pieces," the fat man said angrily. In his opinion, these survivors were all placed on this floor. The people from the heterogeneous cult must not have any other abilities. Ji Yufeng's eyes flashed, as if he wanted to see something in the young man's eyes. Who knew that this scrawny young man was so frightened that he fainted when he was stared at by Ji Yufeng's piercing eyes? Everyone knew that even they, the awakened ones, did not dare to look at the white god of death, let alone such ordinary people. First find all the survivors in this building to find out the information about the heterogeneous religion. Ji Yufeng turned to look at everyone and said slowly, "We still can't take it lightly now. Search the entire floor with the search team. One team of law enforcement team will stay here, and the other team will search with me." Everyone readily agreed. After all, it would be extremely unwise to fight against the heterogeneous cult on the top floor without fully understanding the situation. Who knows what other tricks these lunatics have? It would be safer to start checking out some information from the survivors here. The entire floor is vast, and even if several search teams are sent out to conduct the investigation, it will be quite slow. Under Ji Yufeng's division of labor arrangements, everyone began to take action, while several members of the law enforcement team stayed in the hot spring bath to take care of these miserable survivors. A member of the law enforcement team saw that these survivors were sallow and thin, and they looked like they had not eaten enough for a long time. Feeling compassion, he took out a pack of compressed biscuits from his waist pocket and gave them to several survivors to share. "Oh, brother, I have wronged you. Life will be much easier when we get to Yuhei," a member of the law enforcement team said with emotion. "It's all because of this stupid heterogeneous religion. Many of my brothers died in this operation. The alien cult members are also a bunch of brainless people." When the members of the law enforcement team saw that the operation was about to succeed, they began to vent their anger and curse the heterogeneous church like crazy. The young man next to him, who had just provided information to everyone, picked up a biscuit and stuffed it into his mouth. The violent clicking sound of the teeth reached the ears of the members of the law enforcement team, and the law enforcement team members seemed to have forgotten themselves. The meaning of their words was that they wanted to tear the heterogeneous religion into pieces, crushing the bones and scattering ashes to relieve their hatred. After a while, seeing that none of the young people around him showed any sign of agreement, they thought it was because the young people had not eaten such satiating food for too long. The members of the law enforcement team turned around and said with a smile, "Don't worry, brother, wait until you get to Yuhei, there will be more and more food in the future." "Yeah," the young man replied calmly, but the intensity of chewing at the corners of his mouth was gradually decreasing. "Haha, little brother, have you never been to the Jade Sea base? This kind of compressed biscuits can only be regarded as ordinary food in the Jade Sea. As long as you have a skill, even if you can't become an awakener." The member of the law enforcement team was about to say something else, but was interrupted by the hoarse voice of the young man. "It's just weird, why are these foods? It's not as delicious as human flesh." As he spoke, the sallow-looking young man showed his white teeth, but there were still traces of blood stains on them. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 70. What? The remaining member of the law enforcement team was stunned for a moment, and his expression froze. The next moment, he felt a chill on his neck. Then, a headless corpse appeared in his sight, and he was very familiar with this corpse, because it was his body. The head of the law enforcement team member rolled to the ground like a fallen gourd, with a pair of incredible eyes. The ragged young man licked the blood left on the dagger with a grim smile on his face. He turned his head to look at his companions. "I saw that several survivors who were pale and thin and seemed weak just now stood up at this moment, with the same sarcastic smile on their faces. Beside them, the bodies of the remaining members of the law enforcement team were lying." The young man stood up with a grim smile and sneered, "The people of Yuhei are really kind-hearted. What a group of docile lambs. Next, it depends on others." The interior of the entire club building is extremely spacious. The private room alone has an area of several hundred square meters. Each room has a different style and function, not to mention the luxurious halls and lofts outside. This is also the reason why Ji Yufeng ordered the teams to separate. If they searched every door and every house, the people of the Iwan sect above would probably have run away long ago. Mu Qiu and his friends pushed open a gilded door and walked in. What came into view was a TV screen as wide as a wall, and there was a row of leather booths on both sides. "This is a luxurious karaoke private room." Chen Weiguo erected a light blue barrier shield and stood in front of everyone. The fat man with scars all over his body also held a meteor hammer with a vigilant look on his face. Only Lu Qingfei, who was surrounded by several people, had anxiety and expectation in her eyes. According to the words of the survivors before, Her husband is likely to be in these rooms. As the few people walked deeper, a violent whimpering sound suddenly came from the booth on the far right near the big screen. Miu and others rushed over and saw several survivors in tattered clothes tied in the corner. However, the faces of these survivors were younger. Even though the clothes on their bodies were worn out, it could be vaguely seen from the fabric and the logos of the famous brands on them that these clothes were valuable. The eyes of several awakened people were black, and they looked like they had not had enough sleep for a long time. The fat man stepped forward and tore off the tape on the mouths of several survivors. The condition of these survivors was much better than the previous ones. The first one was a bloated man with ropes tied to his body. When he saw the clothes of several people, he knew that the rescuers had come. As soon as the seal on his mouth was torn off, the bloated man scolded impatiently, "Why did you come only now?" The fat man and others were stunned by the resentful words of blame. When they rescued people in the past, which survivors were not grateful to them, almost kneeling down for them? This was the first time they saw such a domineering survivor. Wei Linger said angrily, "Who are you? We are kind enough to save you, what's your attitude?" The bloated man patted the dust on his sleeves with disdain. Although it was already dirty and old, he still said calmly, "My father is the commander of the Lannan military region. You must have been sent by him to save me. Stop talking nonsense, take us out quickly, I don't want to stay in this damn place for a moment." The man seemed to have been trapped in this building for a long time, and even his tone of voice was full of resentment. Everyone was shocked by the man's unique brain circuit. The fat man was even more furious, and cursed, "Can't you tell the situation? What's the point of bringing up your father? What era is this? The entire Lannan city has fallen into the sea of corpses and blood. Why is he still proud to bring up his background before the end of the world?" Only Miu noticed that the man's eyes were red, as if he was pulled by some invisible wave, and his mental state was a little weird. But the man stood up on his own, but his eyes suddenly looked at Yuichi beside Miu. "The little girl is really good looking, come, let me see, Tianlai novel network." As he said, the bloated man who had just been rescued actually stretched his hand to the girl's beautiful face. Suddenly, a beam of ice blue light directly penetrated the bloated man's eyebrows. From the man being shot to the bloated body falling to the ground, the whole process was just a moment. But at the moment when the man fell to the ground, several survivors behind him also responded, with red eyes, and rushed towards them like crazy. None of the team members reacted to this obvious attack. Only Miu, who was walking at the back, seemed to have expected it. With a flicker of his body, a dagger appeared in his hand, and the necks of several violent survivors were torn open as blood flew. What is going on? Wei Linger looked at the bodies that fell to the ground and didn't recover for a long time. She didn't understand why the human who was talking to them just now suddenly attacked them like a zombie. The others were also puzzled, so they all looked in the direction of Miu. "Miu, how did you find out that there was something wrong with them?" The sharp dagger made of ice in his hand turned into frost and dissipated. Miu smiled at everyone and said, "Their mental state is much better than that of the group we met before, but this is also the most bizarre thing." The reason was of course made up by Miu. What really made him notice the abnormality was his keen mental ability. Miu glanced at the corpses of survivors on the ground. "I saw an indescribable excitement in the eyes of these people, but it was definitely not the joy after being rescued, it was more like excitement." Excited, everyone was confused. It's like taking drugs, these people seem to be still living in their own spiritual world. Miu said, looking up in a certain direction in the sky. "I think you can explain to us the reason for all this, right?" Everyone looked around suddenly, only to find that there was a sudden wave of water like ripples in the air, and immediately a rickety figure wearing a purple robe appeared in front of everyone's eyes. "Is it him?" Everyone in the team was shocked. This purple-robed man was the pagan cultist they met when they first entered the building. Jajaja. As soon as the man in purple robe appeared, he let out a low and sinister laugh. I originally wanted to have fun with you, but I didn't expect to be found out so quickly.